They get you. Yeah. Whether they have one or whether excuse me, just for a moment, if you are taking pictures, we ask that you just remain in your seats. We're doing a webcast, so we don't want you to block the camera or cameras. All right, does that sound good? What about you? Does that sound good? No, I think it sounds great. Okay. What's your request? Okay, you stay. All right, good. Okay, I thought you'd agree. All right, thank you. Thank you. No, of course. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, how does that, so do you know how, oh, okay, so do you know how to manipulate it when the time comes? Oh, so they're just waiting for the audio?
It should be up.
Oh, okay, fine.
How's it?
Just kind of left that as extra leadership space. I don't know who's going to show up.
That's great. And actually, we can
Running.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you all on this wonderful morning, this very special morning for NYU, for NYU Stern, but especially for Paul Romer. And Paul, let me, on behalf of the entire NYU community, wish you our warmest congratulations on this marvelous recognition of your work. I think, if I may, let me also express my congratulations to the co-winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, Bill Nordhaus. And for me it's a pleasure because today we celebrate one of my current colleagues winning the Nobel Prize, and Bill Nordhaus is one of my former colleagues at Yale. I was a professor at Yale, and Bill is even a former provost of Yale, as am I. So it's a great pleasure to see that. And let me just say that in selecting Drs. Romer and Nordhaus, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has recognized economic research that is, in its essence, an optimistic view of the power of economic theory. Paul's work in particular centers on economics as it applies to real life, and it teaches us that technology is something that we can and should harness for the collective good. Indeed, in one of his most famous papers on the micro foundations of growth theory, and that's been cited more than 25,000 times, he states that the enhanced speed and ease of communication, sharing and collaboration that comes with improvements in technology, that can and is enabling faster progress on key social challenges. And it allows great minds throughout the world to contribute to that advancement, no matter where they reside. Let me say, while I mention the world, Paul Romer has been one of the strongest supporters over many years of NYU's engagement with the world, our global network of sites and campuses around the world. And Paul himself spent an extended period at NYU Shanghai teaching undergraduates there, and really was one of the reasons why the relationship between NYU Stern and NYU Shanghai is so strong today. We are particularly pleased that the recognition of NYU Stern is taking place today, but also Paul's involvement with the NYU Marin Institute of Urban Management. His role in both of these institutions, his role in the academy and in the economics community, clearly illustrate the value and the power of fundamental economics research in enabling us all to plan for a better and a more sustainable future, especially in cities, but also far beyond them. Let me say that Dr. Romer is the 6th NYU economist in the past 20 years to be honored with the Nobel Prize, and thanks to their excellence and the work of many others in the economics departments of NYU Stern and of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, I'm economics in the world. He's the only NYU economist, to my knowledge, that has created his own app for the purpose of helping to provide more than 1 billion answers to homework problems from students and school children around the world. So you can see Paul is committed to his economic economics research further impact of economic growth in the world, but he's also a great teacher, utterly committed to ensuring that students around the world receive the benefit of his wisdom. And so let me finish by saying how very pleased we are. This is not only a recognition must continue to invest in fundamental research to help us understand the impact of technological innovation on the world. And Paul Romer's work is among the finest in the world, and it's wonderful to see it recognized today. So congratulations, Paul. Thank you.
I'm delighted to invite NYU's Provost, Catherine Fleming, to the podium.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here in a room in which Professor Romer gave one of the most remarkable lectures I've ever heard. I'd like to say that Professor Romer really represents what we would like to think of as being distinctive of NYU's approach to the social sciences, an applied way of thinking about the social sciences. His thought about economics is relevant to real people as well as simply to experts, which is not to imply that experts aren't real people, but we all know many of them and know that at times there can be a divide between the way that they think about things and the way that that thought is translated into action in the world. That is very much not the case with Paul Romer's work. He is one of the most deeply thoughtful people I know about how to make the world. And as an administrator, I also would like to add that quite unusual for a scholar of his stature in his direction of the Marin Institute of Urban Management, and indeed in his creation of that institute as something truly, truly distinctive in the NYU and social science landscape. And I'm very grateful to him for that as well. It's such a pleasure to be here. Paul, my sincere congratulations. We're thrilled.
Next, I'd like to invite Raghu Sundaram, the Dean of the NYU Stern School of Business.
Thank you all and good morning. This is obviously a wonderful day for all of us, for NYU, for Stern, but most of all I'm delighted for Paul. I first met Paul in 1988, the year that I joined Rochester's Department of Economics as an assistant professor. Paul was just on his way out of Rochester. He was going back to Chicago. Only 5 years out of his PhD then, Paul was already a legend. All the traits that define him today, his fierce independence, his innovativeness, his iconoclasm, his attitude of always being respectful of tradition but never deferential, all those traits were already present in abundant measure when I first met Paul those 30 years ago. Paul came to Stern in 2010, and that was actually my first reconnection with him after I'd met him in '88. He came to Stern in 2010, where he set up the urbanization project, in which they, amongst other things, study the way the growth of cities can be harnessed to advance global progress and how to shape urbanization itself to better the life of humankind. Paul's contributions to NYU have not only been in the form of research or, as Provost Fleming mentioned, in administration. Our students have also been huge beneficiaries, both of his teaching in the classroom and of various experiential projects which they've been used to work around the world. My congratulations again, Paul. We're thrilled for you.
I'd like to now introduce Clayton Gillette, the director of the Marin Institute of Urban Management and the Max E. Greenberg Professor of Contract Law at New York University School of Law.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody for being here. It is more than a privilege for me to be here with Paul Romer and to introduce him to you. We are all aware of Paul's contributions to the world of economics, but Paul has also been a visionary with respect to the role of the university in modern society. Paul has long advocated merging the theoretical insights generated by traditional university research with real-world needs. More specifically, he saw a role for the university in addressing the critical challenges of urban living. By marrying the academic with the practical, Paul believed that the university could work with cities to improve the opportunities available to urban residents, both here in New York City and around the globe. What's more, by taking on applied work, Paul believed that NYU could not only make the world's cities more prosperous, more inclusive, and safer, but also better position its scholars to improve our fundamental understanding of urban areas. When Paul took on the role of director at the Marin Institute of Urban Management in 2013, he put his vision for applied urban research into practice. To this day, the Marin Institute remains dedicated to Paul's vision, working with cities and other jurisdictions to improve the delivery of public services and to effect positive change. I can think of no greater testament to Paul than to recognize how successful academics from around the country were willing to migrate to New York to change the way they thought about the roles of both the university and the larger society and their own roles within the university in order to have an opportunity both to work with Paul and to help fulfill his vision. On behalf of the faculty, the research staff, the administrative staff of the Marin Institute, it is my great pleasure both to introduce Paul to you and to congratulate him on this tremendous achievement. Paul
There'll be other opportunities to talk about the ideas, their policy significance. I thought it might be more helpful today to talk a little bit about the personal side of what it means to be a scientist, because the real value of these prizes is in celebrating the enterprise. So after doing some very pure kind of ivory tower type research on growth, I started to think about how this could translate into policy. So I wrote a paper about bringing back some elements into government support for PhD students that were in the previous Defense Authorization Act that was passed during the Sputnik era, but those elements had been lost in more recent rounds of funding. So there were some congressional staffers who got interested in that paper. They reached out to me. I started meeting with them from both the Republican, Democratic sides, and we eventually converged on a bill that would bring back this kind of fellowship program. And they had a Democrat and a Republican to sponsor it in the Senate, and then a Democrat and Republican to sponsor it in the House. So I was in Washington and then woke up on the morning of September 11th, 2001, and realized that the press conference wasn't going to happen. You know, sometimes the time isn't right. Sometimes things happen that just don't, that don't go your way, and so you gotta take another path. This was at a time when I was actually very discouraged about the lack of engagement with some of these ideas within the economics profession. So part I saw that there was going to be no opportunity to do anything in science policy in the United States, and I had to go figure out something else to do, and so I focused on education. Then let me go back in time and tell you another story. When I first arrived at the University of Rochester, I think in my first year, but we could go back and see, there was a Nobel Prize that was awarded to George Stigler. I remember it was George, and I went into the Commons room and said something a little bit disrespectful, as people have noted, that, maybe they should just give the prizes out at random. Maybe that's what they're actually doing. And I realized when I said that I had really hurt a senior colleague that I admire a great deal, Lionel McKenzie. And I just, in an instant, I saw that Lionel had been hoping each year that he might, because he was a very good candidate, arguably a better candidate than other people who had gotten prize for similar work, that every year he was disappointed about not getting the prize. So I didn't even have a paper published at this point, so it was like absurd for me to think this. But I remember promising myself at the time, I'm never going to want to have the Nobel Prize. I'm never going to hope for it. I'm never going to expect it, because it can just tear you up. So what do? You face setbacks. You know, awards. You know, what you do is you commit to something that's larger than yourself. That's what helps you keep going. And that sense of belonging means that you can take satisfaction out of a career, whether or not you happen to be the one who gets a prize for it. And this is part of what makes the university and part of what makes science special, is it creates this opportunity we have to commit to something that will last beyond our lifetimes, and ideally will make the world a little bit of a better place. And then just to close the loop, I sold this software company and then started thinking about what might be the most important policy thing I could do, because I still couldn't see any way to do science policy. And I convinced myself that urbanization was the most important thing we could do to help encourage the catch-up growth in the developing world. And so I started looking around for some university that was at Stanford. Through Peter Henry, kind of heard about my idea, was willing to meet with me, and John kind of committed. We could do that here. And so I came to NYU thinking we'd have a chance to really do something in practice that could matter in urban development. And my role at the Marin Institute was not as the idea generator. I wasn't, people who were actually doing it. So you can serve in a lot of different ways, but what kind of keeps one going and what makes it also rewarding is that kind of commitment to something that's you got to find a way to keep your focus on what matters in the long run. Thanks. Oh, no, I'll stand. Yep. You know that fight or flight thing? If it gets hostile, I'm ready to run. So. Okay.
Is this on? Just a couple of housekeeping items as we move to the Q&A. For those of you in the room, we have mic runners. In order to ask a question, just raise your hand. And I would ask you to please state your name and your media outlet. For those of you who are tuning in via live webcast, we also have a way for you to ask questions either through Twitter at NYU Stern or over the phone. Sorry, it's on our site, but just quickly, 1-800-326-0013. Internationally, 203-702-1000. Sorry about that. And you need a passcode. Second. And the conference ID is 693-5228. So with that, can we have a question from the audience?
Hello, I'm Anne Tiberg of Swedish television, TV4 News Sweden, and I'd like to know, what was your initial reaction when you when you learned that you were awarded this prize?
Well, I think if we explored my personality deeply, we'd explain that I'm kind of I lack respect for certain sources of authority, but my ability to be disruptive is tempered by my cluelessness. So there were 2 phone calls this morning before 6. I didn't answer either of them. I get spam calls all the time, but I couldn't get back to sleep. So I got up and looked at the phone and saw it was from Sweden. Now, I thought that the prize was next Monday. I knew it was always on a Monday, but I thought it was next Monday. So I called back thinking they were trying to do some like due diligence or something about somebody else, and then And then they asked me if I would accept. And, well, I didn't ever want it, but yeah, I'll accept.
So are you going to celebrate?
Well, I must say, the other thing is, the moment where I got happy was when I asked them, did somebody else receive the prize? And they said, yes. Pause. Who was it? Oh, it's Bill Nordhaus. That was when I got happy, because Bill is a terrific colleague. He's a terrific person. And to a degree that hasn't been picked up necessarily in the quick coverage, long before he worked on climate issues, he was working on the same questions about the economics of discovery and ideas about 10 years before I started working on them. So there's a very close intellectual kind of connection, and I'm really pleased for Bill. Okay, and then you had a question I ignored. What was that?
Are you going to celebrate?
Oh, I promised my girlfriend we'd go out to dinner.
Yeah, Maria Teresa Cometto with Il Corriere della Sera from Italy. Can you please explain how your work about urbanization here at NYU relates to ideas about sustainable global growth?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Can I explain it? Well, we'll see. I don't know. I have a conjecture in mind. The models sometimes help us see things very starkly. We strip away a lot of details. When you strip away all the details, catch-up growth it's easy to see why a country like China might catch up. What's puzzling is that many countries don't, because they literally don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can use what's already known to take advantage of the same technologies that we use. So the puzzle is what gets in the way of the flows of knowledge and the acquisition of skills. And so education's a part of it. But I became convinced that urban areas, or to use a phrase that a colleague of mine, Ed Glazer, uses, cities make us smart. What it is cities are the place to world who can't yet connect into this chance to learn. Cities that can welcome them. And here I'm going to use the language of my colleague Solly Angel, who's been doing this work in Ethiopia and Colombia, for example, as a proof of what's possible. What we need to do is make room for people who want to move into cities. There's billions of people who want to move into cities, and people who are already in cities who want to have more space. We've got to make room for that to take place. So, as I said, I'm not an expert in urban planning, but I saw the opportunity there and came to NYU because NYU was the kind of scrappy, risk-taking sort of place that was willing to try something like this. And through the Marin Institute and the work of Solly, I think we have a chance at showing people that this is doable. The same thing that New York City did in 1811 that contributed to the significant success of New York as a city, Solly and his team have been doing in Hawassa and Bahir Dar in Ethiopia, and in Monteria in Colombia. And I'll be going back to Ethiopia in the next month or two. I told you I was clueless. Sometime in the next 2 months, I'm going back to Ethiopia to just see about the progress there. So if we can give people a chance to do what they want to do, which is just move in and connect with this world of opportunity, with this chance to learn, we can really make a difference in what the quality of life is like for, I think, billions of people. Did I explain it? Is that okay? Okay. I'm not in charge of calling.
Hey, it's Sandra from Tencent. So first of all, the Nobel Prize actually recognized your work, which contributes 30 years ago. So I mean, nowadays, do you see the knowledge or idea has been created by some new ways because of the maybe new technology? The other thing is that the president says that you are committed to NYU Shanghai as well. So I want you to maybe comment on China's innovation mechanism. What's the bright spot or what's the new challenge there? Thanks.
Okay. Do you know the saying in English, so what have you done lately? You know, that's, I think, one way to interpret, well, that was work 30 years ago. I mean, you know, what are you doing lately? China is a very interesting example of this model I was describing of making room for urban development that then, and these urban centers are the hubs that connect you to the rest of the world. So it's often coastal urban development that provides opportunity. So I wanted to experience this period of transition in China directly. And of course, I wanted to support this very bold initiative that NYU had taken to try and establish a kind of this connected network version of the university that nobody's been able to make work so far. But I think NYU's doing actually a very good job with it. So, so it was a great experience. I spent the fall semester several years ago teaching in NYU Shanghai. I think there was another part of your question I forgot, but. Well, you know, to be honest, I've been really disappointed that we just haven't had the kind of political environment where we could think about, you know, speeding up technological progress and doing something as bold as we did when, like, it's like, okay, let's invent computer science. You know, that was a bold, good thing to do. In an earlier period in the United States, we invented chemical engineering and schools of chemical engineering. So I've been a little disappointed that the government hasn't been able to take the lead on anything in technology policy. But, you know, you have to take the long view on these things. In terms of connections, the surprise that emerged out of this work on growth is as follows. I was trying to understand, why is growth speeding up over time? It wasn't just, even though resources are scarce, we're maintaining growth. Growth was getting faster and faster. As Andy alluded to in the part he quoted from my work, what's driving this is that we've got more people connected with each other, all working to learn new things. So it isn't just that we stand on the shoulders of giants, it's we're part of a very big team. And the bigger the team gets, the faster progress we can make together. So this work that seemed like it had nothing to do with trade, I think actually provides a much deeper justification and rationale for why globalization is so important. And again, I can't point to direct consequences of that, although people are much more attentive since I worked in the early 80s on things like international property rights and how property rights now get incorporated into trade agreements. So there's certainly, you know, some awareness and some recognition of these issues. But I think what we need to all keep in mind is that globalization is not just about trading stuff. You know, because we got enough stuff here, and, you know, people in other parts of the world have their own stuff. Globalization is about sharing and protecting.
Congratulations, Dr. Romer. I'm with W Radio Columbia. Climate change is part of
Columbia University?
No,
city.
Country.
Country. Okay, got it. I'm due back for Monteria and Valle du Par, so you got to get me an invitation. So.
Obviously, yes. We're waiting for you there. Climate change is part of the investigation. So what would you say to a person with authority or not, president or not, who denies climate change?
There's a phrase which I'm afraid may come across as more politically charged, but I don't mean it that way. But it's that you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And this really is the essence of what science can do, is people will make different value judgments, they'll have different preferences, different priorities, but what science can do is provide a statement of the facts. And science is actually it's the most important thing that humans have ever invented. This community of people who actually make progress on average towards and people are people, and we're never all that consistent or well behaved. What's a little bit troubling, even though I remain very optimistic about technological possibilities, is that it seems as though we're starting to lose our commitment to the facts. And to think about this in a somewhat, I think mostly apolitical context, just think about the anti-vax movement. This started with a piece of fraud by a university researcher, so I think we need to be mindful of how incredibly dangerous and compromising it is for all of us if we look the other way when we see something like academic fraud. We just have to have zero tolerance for this. But the fraud was uncovered, but yet the anti-vax kind of movement has continued to just propagate. To hear it firsthand was so gripping. Her less educated families had no problem listening to her as an expert in vaccinating their children. It was the better educated families, she lives in California, it's the better educated families who were all skeptical and had these crazy ideas about vaccines. So I think that it's a very important time for us to try and agree and support some process that establishes the facts, because this process of better standards of living, better health, better opportunities, more equal opportunities, so this process all derives from some system which figures out what's true and what's not. And it's so important to the future that should be, I think, a very high priority going forward. It may become, even though I'm going back to Ethiopia, and still remain very committed to the power of urbanization to help people in the developing world. I think we may need to organize a kind of effort to understand science, I mean this more broadly. My girlfriend is a professor of French literature and bristles a little bit when I say science, as if the humanities don't matter. But it's the whole life of intellectual inquiry that the university represents. That's part of sharpening our ability to communicate with each other, figure out what's true, make the logical connections, disagree with each other in a way which is respectful but forceful. All of those things are part of what the whole university community does, and they're very important to defend and protect.
Thank you. I'm Goro Ui from TV Tokyo. This is Japanese TV company. My question is, Japan's inflation and economic growth are having very slowing now. So do you think to continue having economic growth, what should Japan need to do?
There's one of the reasons that growth is a confusing topic for people is there's two different types of growth. The way I would teach it, like in the MBA courses here, would be to say there's something we call potential output. And it's things like bringing in new technologies, raising skill levels, building better infrastructure. Those things steadily increase potential output over time. There's a very different set of forces that can influence whether we remain at potential output or if we fall below and have massive unemployment, or, and this hasn't been a problem recently, but in the past, or if we go above potential, which you can do temporarily, but which in the past at least tended to lead to inflation. So anytime you ask about growth, you have to be thinking about, well, which kind do I mean? And when economists say something like, well, what will happen if the savings rate goes up? What will happen to growth if the savings rate goes up? You have to say either, well, it depends, or you have to say, which type of growth do you mean? Higher savings rate can slow down this process of getting back to full employment, to potential employment. But more saving, more investing in the future can increase potential output over time. Japan was one of the first countries to suffer from this problem of very low interest rates and an inability to use monetary policy to get back to potential output. But in the longer run, its growth prospects will be determined by its commitment to raising skill levels, bringing in new ideas, and making those kinds of investments that will keep improving the quality of life. And the trick in policy is to juggle these two different imperatives, which can call for different types of policy responses. We joke about a two-handed answer in economics. Well, you know, that was a two-handed answer.
Hi, Ethan Wolfman from Yahoo Finance. You were just talking about how there, may be some fact issues going on right now. I'm wondering, how do you get government and politicians to care what economists and other academics have to say, to care about the facts, and to look at that when they're making policy?
Well, I went to the World Bank immediately after the Brexit vote. And there's an interesting analysis that I think is very insightful about the people that they refer to as somewheres and anywheres. But if you set that aside, part of the Brexit vote was a bunch of people saying, these groups of there's somewheres, people from a place. There's a bunch of people saying, if all the economists are for it, I'm against it. And so I think we live in a democracy, so the voters actually rule in the end. So I took Brexit as a serious warning that economists need to think about why we'd lost our legitimacy with those people. Had we overstepped in promoting some value judgments rather than just the facts? So the very first step is that we got to make sure that we've got our act together, and we can really claim integrity, honesty, open disagreement, and claim that we have a process that moves towards the facts. And be appropriately humble about what any one of us really knows and what we collectively can know. So that's the very first step. I don't know how you organize the political action to help translate that into practice. But communicating the facts can help. There are a number of parents in the United States who've started to think that a university education is a waste of time. If you look at surveys, there's these hotbeds of liberal kind of views, or protections of safe space or something. I heard a paper where they showed that if you just show people, here's how much your average earnings go up if you get a degree from just the existing universities in the United States. That fact actually changed minds, because they didn't realize that whatever you might not like about some of the optics at a few places, the university is this transformative experience for young people. So we got to be sure we're not like shouting or joining in on a shouting match, but we need to be credible and say, look, let's just look at what it does to earnings on average if you get a degree. And I think if we stick to that approach, we'll have done our jobs. And then my father was a politician. There'll be people who are like political entrepreneurs who figure out how to mobilize coalitions to get things done. But that's a different, that's a different game. And I think we have to be very careful about what our role is. If we're going to be like the umpires in the fact business, we can't go get on the playing field and try and score a goal too. So.
Steve Burns with WCBS Radio. I'm the local news guy. Our newsroom's right around the corner. So I wanted to ask, what does it mean to be in New York when you win this? What is your relationship with New York, and how has New York influenced your research?
Well, first, economists assume that people know what they like. It's just not true. I thought I was going to hate it when I moved to New York. I loved Palo Alto, and I came here just because NYU had this great opportunity. So I was smitten with the city when I got here. So, one, I had no idea how much I was going to enjoy the city. Two, I wish I weren't living here, actually, because New York is probably the most successful city in the world. And the planning approach that it took, starting with this plan in 1811, is the model that everybody should be following. And when I say that as somebody from the United States and from New York, it's hard to make sure that people understand I'm not just being chauvinistic. I always loved Paris, but Paris has no real bearing on how you can make progress, because Paris was this case where they bulldozed a bunch of bad planning after it had taken place, and that's just very costly, and it's just not going to happen again. But New York is just a proof that if you just make a little bit of a plan in advance, amazing things can come out of it. So I was being a little bit facetious about wishing I didn't live here. I may not have known about the 1811 plan if I hadn't moved here. And there's some texture you pick up. I try to tell people that like sweatshops in Bangladesh. I mean, New York was sweatshops and fires and deaths 100 years ago. So if you're willing to take the long run, it doesn't take that long to get from Bangladesh to what we have now. And you understand that if you walk past the building where the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was, and that was a sweatshop in one of these buildings. So that was a plus too. It's a city that welcomed millions of immigrants, including from outside the United States. So you really couldn't, I think, pick a better model. So you know how I sell it? I call it the Burning Man approach to urbanization. And it's just, you go stake out where the roads are going to be, and you just let people come and sort of do their thing. It's Burning Man. Oh yeah, cool, I get it. Yeah, but it's really the 1811 plan.
Thank you. Congratulations, Dr. Romer. My name is Yong-Sung Chang with Mail Business Newspaper based in Seoul, Korea. I would like to ask you about Korean economy. What's happening now is there are a lot of recent talks going on about opening up of North Korea. What do you think this kind of opening up of North Korea would have effect on Korean economy? Thank you.
So, again, my job is to just try and describe the facts. The facts that many people are familiar with in, say, kind of intellectual progressive circles are that if you let a small number of immigrants come in to a society, they can be assimilated into the society. It grows stronger. Its character doesn't change. But if you think about what the physicists will call a thought experiment, some logic to some possibility that if too many people come in too fast, it could undermine the things that people value in their existing society. With really no problem at all. Very rapid rates of immigration could be destabilizing. And arrangements that people make to accommodate big flows, like treating the immigrants as having different legal rights than other citizens, can also be very disruptive. So I think we need to all understand that this challenge we're confronting of hundreds of millions of people who say they'd like to move from the place where they currently live. It could well be billions, but at least hundreds of millions of people who want to move. It's not going to be an easy process to accommodate that. And I'm generalizing from the South Korean case to the world, but I think it's the same problem we see all over the world. Some of you may know I proposed something called charter cities, which was a different kind of political structure for creating places that could do what New York did before. I think the verdict on that is it's the worst idea that has come along, except for all the others. And people are now kind of coming back to this idea, but you can think of it as being a little bit like Hong Kong in the way that it could accommodate millions of people from China. I think there's some more appreciation that something like this kind of structure might be helpful, and it's not a great solution. Nobody likes it, but it's like you got to ask, well, compared to what? Yeah, I don't think I can say any more than that. But I think there should be a plan for what to do if any economy is facing an inflow of 10 or 20 million people. It sounds extreme, but it's not a remote possibility at all. And we need to really think seriously, what would we do? There's a lot of indications of things you can do that are not going to work, including things that could actually destroy the political culture in your country. So for a period of, after I sold the software company, I was trying to figure out what else to do. I took flying lessons, fly a plane, which I loved. My flight instructor once said to me, if you ever find yourself saying to yourself, this will probably turn out okay, land the plane. His point is that when you say, well, this will probably turn out okay when things are starting to deteriorate, you don't have a backup plan. And I think on these issues about migration, we don't have a backup plan. The United States doesn't. I mean, just think about the turmoil in Venezuela right now. What if there were millions of people who need to go someplace in a hurry out of Venezuela? Or, violence in Central America, or, there's all kinds of things that could create large flows like Europe has confronted. Nobody's got a humane, thoughtful plan about how could we help people who are in such need without jeopardizing the social and political systems that we have. So it's a very important practical topic, and we need to think about it.
So again, this is a question from a reporter who's tuning into the live webcast, Steve Matthews at Bloomberg. Dr. Romer, you wrote a paper called The Trouble with Macroeconomics, critiquing that there's too much focus on esoteric measures. Can you provide an update on your current views on this paper and the state of macroeconomics?
When Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton, somebody asked him, how long does it take you to prepare a speech? And he said, well, if it's a 10-minute speech, it takes all of 2 weeks. It's a 30-minute speech, I can do it in a week. And if you want 2 hours, I'm ready now. So I could give you 2 hours on macroeconomics, but I don't think that's what you want or anybody needs. That's a complicated topic, but the way to put it in the context of this larger discussion is that we have to be very strict with ourselves and our colleagues and adopt this zero tolerance attitude for anything that even hints of a lack of intellectual integrity. And this is not like fraud, like somebody's trying to fake the data or something, but it's a lack of vigor in pushing to see, is this really right? Might be my friend, might be my former kind of colleague, but if I think it might be wrong, it's my job to say it's wrong. And we got to do that, and we got to preserve a culture where that's okay. That's part of the job. But to do it in a way where we can show everybody, you can disagree very explicitly and very bluntly, but do it in a way which is respectful of the other person and with full understanding that you could be wrong. And that's the kind of exercise that I tried to engage in with that paper. And what's interesting is I thought I might have been wrong. I may have been. I thought I was too harsh, maybe on macroeconomics. I thought I was saying exactly what I saw it, but I realized I might be wrong. What surprised me is that I haven't gotten any, critiques back that are responsive to the things I said.
Can we get one from the back? That's
Yes,
possible.
please.
Yes, hi, Aaron Rainen, AFP. Just in the shortest...
What's AFP?
AFP, Agence France Presse.
Ah, okay.
Yes, in the shortest amount of time, can you give us the high-level view of why you won this prize? What is your research really in the shortest amount of time for a general audience, if you would?
Under 10 minutes? That'll take a month
30 seconds.
to get ready.
30 seconds.
You know, Twain didn't, but is thought to have sent in this submission note about his manuscript. That, you know, I would have written less, but I didn't have the time. So, the facts are that I was, after a 10-year gap following Bill's work, I was kind of alone in starting to ask these questions about what kind of a good is an idea? What does it mean to say we produce ideas or we trade ideas? How is that different from corn or steel? And that analysis of the economics of ideas grew into this understanding of why things are speeding up that involves this more effective teamwork of billions of people all trying to push forward the frontiers of knowledge. And it has practical implications for both globalization and for things like science policy towards how we train the next generation of students. So it isn't just an ivory tower kind of activity. It's a kind of disciplined inquiry that matters for decisions we have to make. That was probably twice as long as you wanted.
Paul, do you have time for one more? How are we doing?
Sure, if you'll pick.
We have one from, another one that's come in from Twitter. This is from Tricia Bazoo at BizEd Magazine. How do you hope that your research focus on impacting urban policy will translate to the business and economics classroom to influence the teaching of future business leaders?
I alluded before to this notion of scale, that when you can think of scales the way like physicists do, like powers of 10 or something like that. What I discovered in trying to teach about urban, both at Stanford and here, is that it operates at a scale which is beyond the scale that almost anybody who's getting an MBA will engage. You know, firms, even the biggest firms, are not even close to what cities are like. So there, for some students, it was a kind of intellectual inquiry that they appreciated, and as voters and citizens, it will help. But to be honest, it isn't the kind of practical, usable knowledge for somebody who's going to go into business that we provide in something like an accounting course or finance courses. So there are some overlaps in things like how you manage large organizations, but cities are different enough that they really deserve their own kind of inquiry and even training courses. And this is part of what the Marin Institute is doing, is thinking about the research and the practical demonstration. Here's what you can do in a city if you want to accommodate like very rapid inflows. And it involves a much more laissez-faire kind of style than is common in most businesses. What cities need right now is big plans, like very big plans. Plans like the plan in 1811, which was for a 7-fold expansion of the built area in New York City. You can't have a big plan that's also micromanaging or in a lot of details. It can't be complicated. So to have big plans, they got to be simple, and you got to rely on people to fill in a lot of the details. And that's really not the way most. That's not indicative of the kind of problems that most people in businesses face. So, you explore, you try, and then you make course corrections.
Okay, last question.
Congratulations on winning. My name is Yuki Chiba from TV Tokyo. So American economy is like expanding and growing in a fast pace. Do you think it will continue to grow, or is there any risk of economic crisis in the future?
There's definitely a risk of it. I mean, there will almost surely be another financial crisis. We just don't know when, where it'll start, and what form it'll take. But this is a little bit like, you know, in flying the plane, you don't just say, well, God, I hope the engine never fails. Like, you have a plan. What are you going to do if the engine fails? And we should have a plan for what we're going to do when the next financial crisis hits. And there are practical lessons I think we could learn from the last crisis, and I don't see a lot of even attention devoted to those. Especially what we've got to watch is not just the economic consequences of how we try and stabilize, but the political consequences of a way of stabilizing which is perceived to be unfair or inappropriate. So, but I guarantee you we'll have another big crisis, almost surely coming out of the financial sector somewhere around the world. We just don't know where.
Okay. So I think that's a wrap for now. Would just like to say to the media, if you have any additional inquiries, I'm sure you do, my colleagues in the front here were happy to either kind of take the question or somehow get some of those questions to you at some point.
I found I couldn't keep up on email this morning, but I was on Twitter, so Paul M. Romer on Twitter. And I'm also going to have to go restart my web server because
it crashed. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, particularly on such short notice. We're thrilled to have you, and one last congratulations to Paul Romer.